مالک یوم الدین ایاک نعبد و ایاک نستعین اہدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین انعمت علیہم غیر المغضوب علیہم ولا الضالین صدق اللہ العلی العظیم صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وجل مقتل میں تھا جو لاش اصغر تمام رات جنگل میں ڈھونڈتی رہی مادر تمام رات جنگل میں ڈھونڈتی رہی اریاں تھی لاش شم میں شبستان مصطفیٰ پروانہ وار پھرتی تھی خواہر تمام رات پروانہ وار پھرتی تھی بابا کو یاد کر کے سکینہ نہ سوتی تھی اس کو نہ چین آتا تھا دم بھر تمام رات اس کو نہ چین آتا تھا رو رو کے ہائے اپنے چچا کو پکار کر بالی سکینہ مانگا کی گوہر تمام رات بالی سکینہ مانگا کی ایک بے وطن کے قتل کی تیاریاں جو تھیں برپا تھا فوج شام میں شر تمام رات برپا تھا فوج شام میں قبضے کو چومتے رہے تلوار تول کر شوق جہاد میں رہے اکبر تمام رات مقتل میں تھا جو لاش صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وجل فرجہم جب داغ بے کسینہ سکینہ اٹھا سکی اور درد دل نہ خوف کے مارے سنا سکی کھائے تماچے شمر کے جب تک کہ کھا سکی سن کم تھا دکھ بہت تھے نہ برداشت لا سکی روئی تو ظالموں نے جفا بے شمار کی آخر یہ جبر دیکھ کے موت اختیار کی آخر یہ جبر دیکھ کے یہ موت اختیار کی گر آہ کی تو شمر پکارا خاموش ہو اور چپ ہوئی تو بے پدری نے کہا کہ رو کہ شدت آتش سے پکاری کہ پانی دو گہ یاد کر کے رہ گئی بابا کی پیاس کو سوئی جو آنسو پونچھ کے چشمے پراب سے ہے حسین کہہ کے پھر اٹھی بیٹھا ہے حسین کہہ کے پھر اٹھ بیٹھی خواب سے دل میں سما گیا تھا جو شمرے لہیں کا ڈر سونے میں کانپ کے یہ کہتی تھی رات بھر فریاد چھینتا ہے گوہر شمرے بد گوہر آتا ہے ابن سعد چھپوں جا کے میں کدھر زینب پھوپھی سنبھالو کلیجہ دھڑکتا ہے. سجاد بھائی دیکھو یہ خولی گھرکتا ہے. سجاد بھائی دیکھو یہ خولی گھرکتا ہے. جب پیاس لگتی رو کے چچا کو پکارتی. دکھتے جو کان شاہ خدا کو پکارتی. آتا نہ جب کوئی تو خدا کو پکارتی. جینے سے تنگ ہو کے خدا کو پکارتی. کہتی تھی نہ چتانا امام امم رہے. رلوانے کو ودو رہے رونے کو ہم رہے. رلوانے کو ودو رہے رونے کو ہم رہے. حال شب وفات جناب سکینہ ہے یادگار. گویا کہ اپنی مرگ تھی بے کس پہ آشکار. ملتی تھی شام سے وہ گلے سب کے بار بار. ماں کی بلائیں لیتی تھی وہ ماں کی غم خسار. تسلیم کو پھوپھی کی کبھی سر جھکاتی تھی. تھی بے خطا پر سب کی خطا بخشواتی تھی. تھی بے خطا پر سب کی خطا بخشواتی تھی. اب کیا لٹوں گی میں اب کیا لٹوں گی. مال نہیں زر نہیں رہا. اکبر نہیں رہا علی اصغر نہیں رہا. رہنے کو قید خانہ ملا گھر نہیں رہا. ہاتھوں میں ریسما بندی زیور نہیں رہا. دولت ہے کون سی جسے زندہ میں کھوؤں گی. رونا تھا جس کو رو چکی اب کس کو روؤں گی. رونا تھا جس کو رو چکی اب کس کو روؤں گی. اب موت میری سب کو مبارک کرے خدا. مرتی ہے مرتے ہی میرے قید سب کنبا ہو رہا. جاتا رہے بخار برادر کا بے دوا. جنت کو ہم روا ہو مدینے کو اقربا. غل ہو سکینہ لے کے بلا سب کی مر گئی. حیدر کی پوتی مشکلیں آسان کر گئی. غل ہو سکینہ لے کے بلا سب کی مر گئی. حیدر کی پوتی مشکلیں آسان کر گئی. صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد جل فرج. اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وجل فرج.
برائے خوشنودی امام زمانہ بلندتر صلوات.
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وجل فرج. نعرہ تکبیر.
اللہ اکبر. یا رسول اللہ.
نعرہ حیدریہ.
یا علی. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجه. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين بالقاسم المصطفى محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, we introduced a topic last night about how wilaya goes beyond this idea of just seeing the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as authorities. Yes, wilaya has that within it, but there's something beyond that as well too. And what we were trying to establish was that this concept of the Ahlul Bayt being awliya is not just about them having power and authority and they should have been the khulafa, which is true, but it has to do with their maqam and their station with Allah, that they were the closest ones to Allah, which is called walaya, and because of that they are given authority. Any of those individuals who have that qurb and that closeness to Allah, they are the only ones worthy of gaining that wilaya and that authority and power. We then talked about how this concept can also extend to any other facet of our life. And the one we wanted to focus on for these 2 nights was the idea of education itself. That wilaya can serve as an introduction, as we saw last night, how the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam introduced Allah through this concept of wilaya. They taught the Quran, fiqh, usul, everything based on the wilaya that has been given to them, and tested the ummah at every single stage through the same concept of wilaya, specifically through the idea of ghaiba. So we divided up the Ahlul Bayt into this 3 distinct groups: the 1st through the 4th Imam, 5th through the 8th, and then 9th through the 12th. And we showed how, just like in any other educational environment, that they came and had to introduce themselves, introduce the concept of wilaya. After establishing themselves, then they were able to teach the ummah at large. And then finally, in that final phase, now they had to test everybody to see if they actually understood what was being taught. And that testing system within wilaya is the idea of ghaiba. And very specifically, within ghaiba, it's the idea of niyabat. Having a wakil and a naib that is sent, that tests people to see if they're worthy of going to the next phase of their spiritual growth. And that's the part that we had left off on. So we want to continue with that tonight, inshallah. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So we tried to look at the lives of the imams through these different phases to try to establish this point, right? We talked about how the first 4 imams, although they did everything that they could in their time, the major focus was about this idea of muqaddamat and introduction. We said that the next phase of the imams, meaning the 5th through the 8th, had to deal more with ta'allum and education. Why? Because the first phase, the first 4 imams, were able to reintroduce all these concepts of Islam. So now people can accept them, whether Sunni or Shia, whatever label they had, they still would learn from them. That was the idea. And the imams didn't care what labels people had either. Their job was to guide the ummah, whatever background that they had. And then the final phase of the imams said, okay, everybody now keeps coming to the imams and saying, why don't you lead a revolution? Lead an inqilab, rise up against these Umayyads, these Abbasids, whoever it is. And every single time you see, those who know their history well, the imams always pushed back on them and said, hold on. We've heard this before. People keep coming to us. They came to our forefathers, our grandfathers, and said the same thing. You left our grandfather alone in Karbala. Do you think we're going to make the same mistake again? So this history that has been passed down to them, this sacred history, this test that has been passed down to them as well, this testing system was that, look, our job as imams is to rise up and to remove the false khalifa, of course. But that can only happen if there are actually Shias on the ground. If they're not there, then there's no point. Because then people will look around and they'll see that, oh, these Ahlul Bayt are just fighting for power. So every calculated move the imams are making, whenever they're pushed and asked or requested, and sometimes even criticized by others, why didn't you rise up? They said, look, we would have had we actually had supporters and an army with us. And this is that final part in that testing phase. And there's many different examples, and that's what we wanted to go through tonight. Now, in order to finally make sure we establish this idea of wilaya being this, all-encompassing idea, we wanted to do it a few different ways. One is to show how, first of all, this wasn't just something that was done by the imams. We tried to establish it, but as Shias, we need to remember this too, especially when we are criticized by others, that, you guys put the imams on some special maqam and pedestal. Well, no. What we are doing is putting them on a pedestal because they have been put on that pedestal by Allah and by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We are not making these choices on our own. We are not designating somebody to be a wali by our own hawa and nafs. We don't decide these. And this idea of wilaya being the system and an educational system is also not something the imams are just going to do on their own. Anything that they do is based on the seerah of Rasulullah as well. Everything that they've done. When we get to, when we see the riwayat of the 12th Imam, that I'm sure everybody's aware of, and I paraphrase for it so we can move on, that when the dhuhur happens, the Imam in his own word says that I will rise up through the same seerah of my Jad, of my grandfather Rasulullah. So people always ask, how am I going to recognize when the 12th Imam comes? If you know the seerah of Rasulullah, then anybody who comes and acts contrary to that, you'll know that that can't be the Mahdi then. So that only works if we know the seerah of Rasulullah. Okay? So this idea of the Imams introducing, educating, and then testing, it can't just be something they're doing on their own either. Every single one of the Imams, anytime they speak, they think, they act, it's because Rasulullah has done it first. Right? They're just following in his footsteps because he is Insanul Kamil. And that's the example that, of course, exists for the Ahlul Bayt. So now we have to establish the same idea that did Rasulullah do this whole introduction and education and testing thing? If we can establish that, then we can show then why the Imams followed the same exact system as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. No, I don't want to bore you with some academic discussion where we go through all these types of proofs and history. One simple example to get the point across, and then we're going to jump to the Quran as well. So most of us know, obviously, the whole idea of proving this phase of introduction is, there's no point in that. Of course, we know Rasulullah, the first thing he did was introduce himself, right? To introduce himself as a Nabi, as a Rasul to the people in Mecca. Right? So we don't have to say that, did he do that or not? It's obvious to everyone that he introduced himself as being a Wali, a Nabi, a Rasul on behalf of Allah, right? So that's obvious. Now, once that's done, now hopefully we're on the same page when it comes to history. He's doing all this in Mecca. We know that, right, after the bi'tha, the mab'ath, the announcement happens, sometime in the future, the Aus and the Khazraj from Medina, they learn about this. They come, they meet with him, right, in Mecca. They come from Medina, they meet with him in Mecca. And I'm just paraphrasing history because you know better than me, obviously. So they meet with him. They were still having their fights in Mecca, in Medina. So they were asking Rasulullah, can you solve our issues? And in the interim, while Rasulullah was, advising them and guiding them, they accepted Islam. And then now, this is about 12 years after the Mab'ath and the Bi'tha, after the beginning, the commencement, the start of the official mission of Rasulullah. 12 years later, now they're inviting Rasulullah. They're saying, okay, come to Yathrib, come to Medina. We want you to lead this ummah. We want you to come here, right, and be our Nabi, our Rasul, our Wali. So this same formula now is there too, that people are coming to their Imam. Now we always refer to him as a Nabi or Rasul, which is true, but he's still an Imam as well, right? He has all the maqamat. Imamat is a maqam of wilaya. Sorry, this is a side point, but I think it's important for us, especially as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, to know. Sometimes we're accused of putting the Imams on a higher pedestal than, the Anbiya and the Mursaleen. Well, some people, they get into these arguments, who's better than who. We don't bother with those kind of discussions. When the ulama talk about is that there is different maqamat and darajat of wilaya. Not every wali is the same. And not every ability and authority and power they're given is the same. So for example, you ask any Muslim, they would know, there's a difference between a Nabi and Rasul. Right? Risala is higher than Nabuwa. Everybody knows this, right? There's only 313 out of the 124,000 total Anbiya, only 313 of them are Mursaleen and Rasul. Right? Everybody else, they're only a Nabi. So Nabis, their duties, their powers, their authority is much less than a Rasul. Now, that's one maqam of wilaya, is a Nabi. Another maqam is being a Rasul. And there's another maqam higher than that, which is Imamat. Sometimes you're just a Nabi, meaning you're just giving a basic message, and sometimes it's just to your family. Sometimes it's to the town. Sometimes it's to everybody that's alive in the area. Sometimes you're a Rasul. Now you have a new Sharia. Now you have a new message. The wahi that comes to you is a much more intense type of wahi. And, they say a Nabi can only get wahi in their dreams. But a Rasul can get this message while they're awake as well. But now an Imam has abilities higher than a Nabi and higher than a Rasul as well. Again, we're not saying better, we're saying the maqam and the authority, the wazifa, the responsibility is higher now. So now they have to run the affairs of people. So usually this comes with, political authority. This comes with spiritual authority. This comes with managing affairs of individuals. Not every Rasul is an Imam. Some are, but not everyone is. The whole journey of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam is him going from a Nabi to a Rasul to an Imam. That's how it's described in the Quran. Again, you know the Quran, so you can read it yourself. And there's another point I'll bring up as well. When we think about the story of Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam, and how when he loses Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, Right? We always bring this as an example of, see, it's okay to cry for, losing someone. This is an example using the Quran. Allah doesn't condemn him. What's interesting to think about is, why is Nabi Yaqub crying? The usual explanation is that, well, he lost his son. That's why he's going to cry. Any father, if they lost their son like this, they would cry. And the manner that he lost him. What some of the ulama say is that, no. Nabi Yaqub was a Nabi, or some argue Rasul, but Nabi at least. They say Nabi Yusuf was a Nabi, but also an Imam as well. So Nabi Yaqub is not just crying because he lost his son, not just because he lost another Nabi, but because he lost his Imam. His Imam was in ghibat from him. This is what was causing him to shed all these tears, after one after another, until he goes blind. Why? This is the crying that someone has when they lose their Imam. They know their Imam is hazir, but just not in front of them right away. They know their Imam is within arm's reach, but they can't meet them. They can't see them. And they know that what can happen if they actually end up meeting their Imam, and they always have that shauq and that desire to be with their Imam again. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So anyway, back to our discussion. So, the Aus and Khazraj, they've invited Rasulullah. They said, okay, come to Medina now. Now, he's already introduced himself, so they know who he is. They understand the basics of Islam. Now what has to happen? They want some education, okay? So the education has, in some ways, happened already with Rasulullah. Now they say, but we want you to now run our society, to run Medina. Make this the first Islamic city. Now, in order to prove our point, if Rasulullah went right away and just led them, then our whole idea about wilaya and testing and all this goes down the drain. But those who know their history know that Rasulullah did not go right away. In fact, he sent a na'ib and a wakil on his behalf first. Somebody by the name of Mus'ab ibn Umair, also known as Mus'ab al-Khair. A companion that most of us don't know, but he was one of the good companions. Right? Someone who I think he ended up becoming shaheed in Uhud, right? Due to the betrayal of some of the so-called companions there. So Mus'ab, one of the first ones, he is sent specifically by Rasulullah to Medina first. He's sent there to teach them the Quran, to teach them the basics of Islam. Another point that's important to know, according to our historians. Who led the first Jum'ah in Medina? If you ask most people, they'll say Rasulullah, obviously. It's not, it's Mus'ab. They say, again, this is before, right, Rasulullah has even arrived in Medina. Yes, before the Hijrah, Ahsant. Before the Hijrah, Mus'ab has already gone there. He's there for years and years and years. According to some, 3 years he's teaching them first. Preparing the way as the na'ib of his imam. Teaching them. Making sure they're ready. Once things are ready, right? So along the way, as I was saying, he doesn't just establish Jum'ah on his own. Right? He doesn't just act on his own nafs, whatever he wants to do. I think this is good, I'll do my own thing. He asks permission first from Rasulullah, sends him a letter, and then gets ijazah to establish a Jum'ah at someone's house over there. And what's interesting is that the first Jum'ah that was established in Medina only had 12 individuals who were part of it. Now, if I was a proper zakir, then I would take that number 12. I'd do something with it, but I'm not one of those types of zakir, so I'll let you do whatever you want with the number 12. So, now, again, this is 3 years he's teaching them. Once now, Rasulullah sees that they have taken care of my na'ib, my wakil, then they can handle their imam. Then he makes his journey to Medina and then is able to lead them. Why? Because once a na'ib, someone comes on behalf of the actual imam, they give word to their imam and say, look, these individuals will support you. They will not betray you. They are ready for your teachings because I've been able to teach them. Then the imam's ready to come. This now completes the formula we were talking about. Rasulullah introduced himself first to everyone. Then he gave them some basic education about Islam. They accepted. And what did they ask for? Okay, we're ready for the test then. So give us the test. And the test came with the na'ib. That your imam, meaning Rasulullah, will be in Ghaiba. He'll be in Mecca and you'll still be in Medina. But a na'ib, a wakil, a representative will be sent to you. Based on how you treat him, if you treat him well, you listen to him, you follow him, you learn from him, then you pass the test, and then you gain your imam. Then you are able to then level up and go to the next stage of your spiritual journey. Had they failed and rejected Mus'ab, gone against him, done khiyana to him, betrayed him, then we would have seen a different type of history. And this same thing we know, because we fast forwarded, as we mentioned last night, once the ummah was tested again, with Rasulullah now passing away. What was the test? That I am leaving behind a na'ib for you. right? And I've mentioned it multiple times, not just once, not just some random vague hadith, but at the beginning of the mission, in Da'wah Dhil Ashira, throughout the ways I'm comparing him, Musa and Harun, alayhimus salam, I'm making the comparison for you. I'm telling you about this Najat, this ark, this Safinatul Najat that's with them. I'm giving you all these things that he is the Bab and I am the Medina, especially now when we think about the word Medina and how he was the Madinatul Ilm. All these things I'm giving to you because the people in Medina passed the test. Once I'm gone, in Ghaiba, the Na'ib that's sent to you, which should be your Imam, will you be able to follow him or not? And then you see, right after it's done, even before he passes away, on that fateful Thursday, when he just asked for pen and paper, they reject it even there. And then he realizes that they're not going to follow this. And of course, then we see how this culminates in Saqifa. But you know better than me, the history. So once that test is now failed, they're given a naib, they're given a new wali, that if you follow this person properly, then you'll be able to go to the next level of your Islamic journey. But they reject Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam. So this is the reason why you see Amir al-Mu'mineen now has to take a step back. And even there, he says, look, when the Shias, or so-called Shias, were coming to him and saying, let's go fight for your right. Let's go. This Khilafah belongs to you. He says, hold on. I'm not just going to take it, right, based on you coming to me and asking me and demanding me and telling me it's mine. I know it's my haqq. I know it's my right. If you really think that you can support me and fight me, fine. In the morning, next morning, Fajr, shave your heads, and then come meet me in the masjid, and let's see. So many claim that they would come and support him. What do the riwayat say? Maybe 4 or 5 individuals show up. He said, with this amount of people, I can't take my right back. There's no point. Because with this amount of people, then it'll seem like a coup d'etat. It'll seem like it's for political power. And what the Ahlul Bayt, like we said, at every single moment, they're not fighting for power because they're interested in power. They want to do so in order to spread that hidayat from Allah and from Rasulullah. That's what they're trying to do. If the people were not going to be receptive to it, what's the point? And going forward. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. This concept of wilaya being this ultimate testing ground, and then ghaiba being the ultimate way that people are tested, it's not even just in this seerah of the ma'sumin. It's actually in the Quran itself multiple times. If only we go back with this idea, seeing wilaya like this, and then looking and reorienting ourselves and taking another look at these stories. Like you said last night, what is the very first story? I don't mean like in the order of the Quran, but I mean in terms of time. What's the first story that Allah introduces us to? Who are the first characters in this story of the Quran? No, not so. In the beginning of time, before insan is even there, what's the first story that we are learning about? Nabi Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, la'anatullah alayh. Before insan is even talked about, this is the first story that comes there. Before the creation of insan, right? Before the creation of Nabi Adam. This is the first thing that's introduced. Now, anybody knows, the first example you give, the first story you tell, is going to set the stage for everything else that comes. In temporal terms, I'm speaking linearly. In terms of time, that's the first story of the Quran. Yes, you're right, that other prophets might be addressed first in Surah Baqarah. That might be true, of the Bani Israel. But in terms of, if you think about time, that story is first, of Iblis, even before the mention of Nabi Adam. Iblis is first. Because his mistake needs to be known. Now, I'm not going through all the ayat, because I'm sure all of you are already familiar with the story and the ayat. It's just this point that I want to highlight for us, inshaAllah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So, again, we're skipping through the details because we already know them. Iblis has already reached this high maqam and station, that he's able to be with the malaika and the angels. Right? All this ibadat, right? Say 1,000 years, whatever he was doing, thousands of years, ibadat. Now, Allah has created this clay, this teen, this dirt, and has fashioned it into insan, the first of our lineage of Nabi Adam alayhi salam. With this, now he introduces it to the angels, and Iblis is there as well too. And of course, we know how the story goes. Allah then asks everyone present, malaika and Iblis, to do sujood. And all of them, ajma'een, do sujood, illa Iblis. Right? وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. He did istikbar, he had takabbur, he had this pride and arrogance, and Allah says he was from the kuffar. He was a kafir. He rejected. So we all know these parts. Now, when you've heard this story before, how is shaitan's mistake and error and guna and ma'asiyah, how is that usually framed? Right? They say, okay, he was arrogant, which is true because that's what the Quran says. I've heard some people say that he was proud. Yeah, okay, that's the same as arrogant, sure. Some, because he says, خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ, that you made me from fire and made him from clay. So he's making comparisons here, that I'm clearly better than him. So this is an idea of, arrogance, sure. Some people I've heard, in a very sort of anachronistic way, they say, oh, this is racism. This is a very strange explanation. I don't know why we take modern day terms and put it in the Quran like that, but no, it's not that. If you really look deeply with the way that we should be looking at these Quranic stories, what is Iblis really having a problem with over here? Nabi Adam, his creation, well, it's not a big deal for him. Him being sent down and leading individuals, maybe he doesn't care about that. But once he says that I'm making this person the Khalifa fil ard, that this person will be my representative, my na'ib. Right? Allah's introduced him. He's taught Iblis enough. He knows better. And now he says, let's test to see if there's kufr or iman in his heart. So what do? We test him with a na'ib. Let's see if you can handle the wali of your time. So he tests him. So what is that test that's happening in the Quran? You can call it arrogance, you can call it pride, you can say racism if you feel like it, but what Allah is testing even Iblis with is the concept of wilayah. Do you accept the wilayat of Adam alayhi salam? No, he doesn't. He doesn't accept him as the wali. And in rejecting the wilayat of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, what he's really doing is rejecting the wilayat of Allah. Na'udhu billah. That's what he's rejecting. That's why he's able to argue with Allah. He doesn't reject Allah. No, he's not an atheist. Shaitan probably knows Allah better than you and I do. He's definitely done more ibadat than you and I will ever have done. But the problem is, he doesn't recognize his wilayat. So Allah says, he's better than you, he's going to be my khalifa. Iblis says, no, that's not how it works. I'll define who should be a wali. Whether it's democracy, or we'll have a vote, or we'll set up a saqifa, that's how we'll figure things out. So the same principle goes throughout the Quran. Go to Nabi Musa and Harun alayhi salam. Once Nabi Musa leaves the people, who's in charge? A Nabi. A Na'ib, that's left. He's in ghaiba, he leaves somebody in charge. Everybody knows who's in charge. What do the people reject? They reject his wilayah, Nabi Harun's wilayat. Every single story you look at, you can find all these minor spiritual illnesses, you can claim other things, you can blame Samirri, sure, blame all these other factors, they're involved. But the deep spiritual illness that exists within, hopefully not us, but many individuals, is their rejection of wilayah. From Iblis up until right now. Now, of course, we move on to how this connects to the idea of Karbala as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Most of us know this because we remember it, whether it's leading up to Muharram or right in the first few nights of Muharram. This all starts because individuals send letters to their imam. They say, we are ready to support you, we're ready to defend you, come here, we'll take care of you. They're being invited. They've already been introduced to the imam, they know who he is. They have some level of education. There are people in Kufa who are fuqaha, who are, faqih, mujtahids. They're learned individuals. They're the ones writing letters. They're tribal elders. They invite the imam. What does the imam do? Does he bring his own seerah? No, he brings the same seerah as his brother, the same seerah as his father, and the same seerah as his grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's not going to be foolish and go on his own. He's not going to go and get himself become slaughtered by people who do khiyanat. But he's still an imam at the end of the day. If someone asks for a test, even if he might deep down believe that, no, I know they're going to fail, I still have to test them anyway. So let me send a na'ib. And who does he send? Muslim ibn Aqil. Becomes his na'ib and his wakil. And even Hazrat Muslim he's not sure of this. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, you know how they treated your brother and your father. What's the point of this? He says, so this is the difference between you and I. When an imam is requested to do something, we will go through it anyway. We don't have this idea of, we can't determine people's free will. We don't know their akhirat like this. We have to give them that choice. If they fail their test, then they fail. But if they pass, then they pass. We still have to give them this same test. And of course, we know how history goes. That he's sent. It seems initially that they would support him. Right? That's how Muslim feels initially. And that's where the response then gets to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that yeah, okay, it seems as though they will support you. But of course, as we all know history, then the rejection does come eventually. And this is what ultimately leads to Karbala taking place. It's because of that rejection. Even amongst some of the individuals who initially wrote a letter to the Imam, do you know why they rejected Muslim when he came? They said, look, if Hussein comes, we'll fight with him, we'll defend him, but not you. Who are you? What is this a rejection of? His wilayah. It's like, we don't want the na'ib, we want the real thing. But the real thing saying, no, I only come if I can send a na'ib and you take care of him. See, people mistake what this concept of wilayah is. Yes, it ultimately exists with Allah, with the Anbiya, the Mursaleen, with the Aimma, the Ma'asumin alayhimus salam, but there's a reason why the system of wilayah continues. And this is something that we as followers of the Ahlul Bayt pride ourselves on. This is what bothers and gives worry and anxiety to everybody else in the world, the fact that our hidayat doesn't go away. We're not just, off in the middle of nowhere making up our own rules and our laws. We're not confused. That same system of wilayah has been passed down through the ulama, as it was with the companions of that time. That same system, that same chain, that silsila, that hierarchy is still with us today. Whether it started with the Ghaybatul Sughra or continued in the Ghaybatul Kubra. And this concept, if you look at many of the riwayat of the Ahlul Bayt, from Rasulullah onwards, they had been pushing and pushing and pushing the people to understand this idea, because they knew that they would fail this test. Maybe they won't have bad akhlaq. Maybe they'll do ibadat fine. Maybe they'll give their sadaqah. All the other things, they'll check that box. But when it comes to the test of wilaya, ghaiba, niyabat, they'll fail that. And this is where you see that it's emphasized so many times. Let me share with you a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's reported to have said in one hadith, he makes this dua 3 times. Allahumma arham khulafai. Allahumma arham khulafai. Allahumma arham khulafai. Oh Allah, spread your mercy, have your rahmah on my khulafa. Now of course, this is again, at some point in his mission, people don't know what that term khalifa means yet. Khulafa, they don't know. So they asked, Ya Rasulullah, وَمَنْ خُلَفَاءُكَ? Who are your khulafa? Right? So even there, if it was just about political leadership, this wouldn't have been a question. But they're asking for a reason because it wasn't known yet. So he responds to them, الَّذِينَ يُبَلِّغُونَ حَدِيثِي وَسُنَّتِي. It's those who do tabligh of my hadith and my sunnah. And then, ثُمَّ يُعَلَّمُونَهَا أُمَّتِي. And then after they've done tabligh, after they've explained my hadith and my sunnah of all these things, then they do ta'aleem and ta'allum of my ummah as well too. Now, I could go off on a rant over here. I think we're running low on time, so I don't want to do it. But it's important for us to know there's a difference between a muballigh and a mu'allim. Rasulullah's, defining both ideas. He says some people will do tabligh. Yuballighuna hadithi wa sunnati. They can read to you hadith. They'll, give it to you. It's in books. They can say these things to you. But then he adds that after they tell you these things, then yu'allimuna. They have to teach this as well. There are some, technically anybody can grab Wasa'il al-Shia or Bihar al-Anwar or any book they want. They can come and say, this is the sunnah, here's a hadith. That's what some speakers can do without any sort of education. It's possible. But the problem is now they cannot teach these things. So do they know the context of why this hadith is worded the way it is, whether it's authentic or not? No, because they've never formally taught. Do they know that this hadith maybe is exceptional to certain individuals? Maybe it's only for Abu Dhar or Salman, not for the whole ummah? Only somebody who has a background in Islamic education would know something like that. Do they know how this thing should be taught to the people? Right? There are some speakers who all they want to share are the most violent and hateful and fiery types of riwayat, right? All the things about hellfire and Jahannam. They're there in the books, obviously, but is that smart to just tell people nothing about, just hellfire all the time and punishment? Does that motivate people all the time if all you're going to do is tell them that, do this, otherwise you'll be punished? Most of us are not, motivated like that. And there's another extreme too, that some speakers, all they do is they leave all of that and they only talk about the other side, which is, okay, shed one tear for Imam Hussein, you get Jannah. If you, believe in Allah's rahmah, then you'll go to Jannah. All they do is talk about that side. So one group of speakers only talks about khawf. One group only talks about raja. But as if they only read the rest of the riwayat, they'd say that a true mu'min is bayna khawf wa raja. Any true mu'min has no yaqeen and certainty in either of these things. They say, I am in fear that I might be punished because Allah has that haqq and He has that right. And I know that I have guna and ma'siyah, so I deserve to be punished. But I also have raja and hope in Allah's mercy too, because He's Arhamar Rahimeen. And He's reminding me 113 out of 114 times when I start the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That His mercy is universal and it's particular for those who are mu'mineen. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hopeful for that mercy as well too. So Allah doesn't want us to jump to one extreme. To say, look, be worried, but also be hopeful of Allah's mercy. And some who maybe don't understand the context and how the Ahlul Bayt spoke as well, they jump to one of these extremes. Right? Now again, I'm not trying to judge these individuals, but this is what happens. They can regurgitate. They can come and verbatim say the hadith and the sunnah, but they won't be able to do ta'aleem and ta'allum. So there's a big difference between these two concepts. So something hopefully we can keep in mind, inshallah, when we're trying to increase and expand our Islamic education. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The last piece of advice about this idea. This is also a reminder for us too. I know, I'm sure it's not in this community, but there are certain individuals you find in different communities where this concept of wilaya doesn't exist for them. Or if it does, they only restrict it to the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. I mean, it's been a while, but I used to get people who say, well, I don't do taqleed except to the Imam of the time. He's my marja. I was like, that's beautiful. I'm like, do you have a Tawzi al-Masail in front of you? I was like, oh, I have a book of hadith from him. I was like, okay, sure. Now that book of hadith, you're following the, do you read Arabic? No, I don't. So I'm reading a translation. So beautiful. So you're not doing taqleed of the 12th Imam. You're doing taqleed of that translator then. Like, what do you mean? I was like, so you don't understand the hadith by yourself. That translation that somebody's doing, there could be a bunch of different ways you translate it. So that person that you're following, you're picking their translation. That's called taqleed. Because you don't know, you're imitating them. Now if somebody else picks a different translation, right? One person says Mawla is friend, one person says Mawla is master, then who are you going to pick? Are you going to decide on your own? If you decide which one is better, then what you're doing taqleed of is not even anybody else. It's of your own nafs then at the end of the day too. Your own ego. So anybody who has these sort of ideas, what they think is that, Allah made me aql-mand. I have an aql too. I'm aqil. I can decide these things. I can figure it out. I have the Quran. I have the books of hadith. They've been there. But really, they have this issue with authority. They just don't like giving up a little bit of power to somebody else. Even though, what's the big deal? Somebody's telling you how to pray namaz. Why don't you want to let them just give you these rules? What's the big deal? Right? Do you have a problem with khums? Is that the problem? It's always money related? Like that's the issue? It's always these minor issues. But deep down, it's that same issue that Iblis started out with. وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. That he rejected wilaya, even from Allah. Na'udhu billah. That in nearly every single instance of the Anbiya and the Mursaleen, that the people were rejecting their wilaya. And if a naib was mentioned, they rejected that one as well. And with the imams, every time we reject your naib, we'll make sure that we can determine who is a wali. I'll make myself a wali if I have to. So that's our modern day version of this right now. There are people who will just reject the hawza, they reject the ulama, maraj, all these things. Now look, is the hawza perfect? No. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything for you. Are there issues there? Of course there are. Are ulama, maraj, ma'soom? Of course they're not. In the sense that we call the ma'asumeen, 14 ma'asumeen. No. They make mistakes and they admit to their mistakes. And this is a reason why their education doesn't stop. That they sit there in their dars kharij, their bahth al-kharij, in front of hundreds and hundreds of students, trying to prove their point and pass a fatwa and share their reasoning. And a student can get up in the middle of the class and say, well, that reasoning is broken based on X, Y, Z. And that marja, that teacher who's been doing this for decades, will say, actually, no, that evidence is correct. Now I have to change my fatwa. This is a continuing process. Unlike others, our gate of ijtihad is not closed. It's been open and has been improving and improving and improving constantly. Why? Because the thing that they have in common is that they don't reject Allah as al-wali. They don't reject any of the anbiya and the mursaleen as their awliya. They don't reject the ma'asumeen as their awliya. They don't reject any of the previous ulama and fuqaha as their awliya. They don't make themselves a wali either. It's not like these maraja are sitting there, posting their own Tawzi al-Masail online and posting their own videos. Other people do that for them. There's no, nafsaniyat in them. There's no ego in them. It's others who, with their ego, come and try to bring them down. So as a last piece of advice before we end, we want to make sure, again, we can ask questions. There's nothing wrong with that. We can be curious about how fatwas are derived. There's nothing wrong with that. Ask more questions. Most ulama, if they're really ulama, they welcome this. The red flag would be is if you ask a speaker or an alim, oh, I've never heard that before. Would you mind sharing the evidence for that? Or what book it's from? Or what alim you heard it from? If they push you away and say, don't ask me these things, that's where the red flag comes. There should be never a time where somebody's rejected because of their curiosity, their inquisition. It should never be a source of rejection. The reason sometimes people will do that is because they don't have the answer themselves and they don't want to look bad in people's eyes. But as our ulama have said, and of course they're getting this from the Ahlul Bayt, the most important line that any person can say to someone else is ma adri, I don't know. That is the true sense of spirituality and humility and khushu and humbleness. As I can say, I don't know. I haven't researched. I don't know. Let's figure it out. I'll research. I'll ask somebody else who knows more than me, and then I'll share the answer with you. So it's always a good thing for us to keep ourselves humble, to realize that that biggest test for us, even in this zaman, is going to be through the na'ibin and the representatives, the wakala of the Imam of the time, Imam al-Hujjah, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajuhu sharif. And it is this rejection that ultimately, as we said, led to the tragedy of Karbala. As they initially reject Muslim ibn Aqil, and it leads to his shahada. Imam Hussein then, as we know, is turned away from Kufa, brought to Karbala. He ultimately becomes shaheed. And even at every single step, he was questioning those in front of him. He says, I will go somewhere else. He said, I'm only here. And he showed them, these are your letters. This is your signature. This is your name. I'm here because of you. And you see how they began lying. He said, no, that's not us. He says, Allah is a witness between you and I, and you'll see what your akhirah, your azab will be. Now again, the Imam is ready. His companions, his family, they are ready for this sacrifice. But as we mentioned last night, who would ever want to bring their women and children in a situation like this? It's only the household of Rasulullah, the household of Hussein, who can handle the bala that comes afterwards. From Sham and Ghariban, afterwards until they come home to Medina. After they are now put on these saddleless camels, after they are tied up, after Imam Sajjad is put in chains, put in an iron collar with his hands tied to his neck, they are now made to be paraded to see the dead bodies of their loved ones. Now their journey begins to Kufa. When they arrive in Kufa, Ibn Ziyad, la'natullah alayhi, wants to make a parade out of everything. He wants to show his force, his evil to everyone. And as the Ahlul Bayt are now being paraded in the streets, and they're coming there, some people recognize who they are, and others, they're not sure. Who are these individuals? These people who are behijab, bechadar, who are these women who are like this? One woman comes forward. This lady asks, who are you prisoners? Imagine saying this to the members of the Ahlul Bayt. Who are you prisoners? Who are you prisoners of war? And the answer comes to them that we are the prisoners of the Haram of Rasulullah. We are from the family of Rasulullah. And when this happens, people begin now crying. They said, this is the family of Rasulullah. This is what we have let happen to them. And now this woman runs inside. When she sees how she's spoken to the women and children like this, she comes out and brings clothing. She allows them to cover themselves up. She tries to bring them food. And this is where these famous lines are reported and told to us, where Sakina, perhaps over here, says, Inna sadaqah haramun alayna. We can't accept your gifts like this. Imam Sajjad, when he sees everyone crying in this manner, he says, yes, we are the prisoners of the Haram and the family of Rasulullah. And yes, you should cry. And I want you to cry more. But why are you crying when you are the ones who brought us over here in the first place? It's because of your letters, your da'wah, that my father and my uncles and my brothers were killed in Karbala. It's your fault that their heads are on spears in front of me right now. It is your fault that I cannot turn my head and look in any other direction. It's because of you and what you have done. So why do you cry over this now when you are the ones who have killed us like this? The khutbah, after khutbah, begin one by one. Kulthum, Zainab. So they say one of the daughters of Imam Hussein even gives a khutbah. Imam Sajjad, all of them breaking the hearts of all those who are there in Kufa, beginning to start almost like a revolution. And of course, This becomes difficult when they're in front of the palace of Ibn Ziyad. And now, after all this time, now they see Ibn Ziyad, and then they look down in front of Ibn Ziyad and they see the head of Imam Hussein for the first time on a tray in front of Ibn Ziyad. Ibn Ziyad is taking a stick and he's poking the head of Imam Hussein. Some of the ashab are there. They're saying, how can you do something like this? I saw Rasulullah kissing his face. Don't do this anymore. Ibn Ziyad says that if you weren't so old, I would have you killed right away. The arguments begin between them. And now the head has to be sent over to Yazid la'natullah alayh. And as they now prepare for their journey to Sham, many individuals wonder, why is it that when Imam Sajjad is later asked, what was the most difficult part? Why does he say Asham, Asham, Asham? Weren't they both paraded in the streets in Kufa and Sham? Didn't they have to see the heads of their family and friends in both places? Imam Sajjad himself in a narration says, the difference is that when we came to Kufa, we were welcomed with cries and tears. These were people who betrayed us, but they at least knew our maqam and who we are. But when we came inside Sham, they welcomed us with stones. They welcomed us by pouring garbage on our heads. They poured boiling water on top of our heads. This is how we are welcomed in Sham, with the sounds of singing and music. لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. ماتم حسین.
تائبانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تائبانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تیرا جھولا جل گیا اے میرے تشنا دہاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تائبانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں خون بھرا کرتا تیرا ہائے وہ بھی چھن گیا خون بھرا کرتا تیرا ہائے وہ بھی چھن گیا اب جیوں کس کے سہارے پاس میرے کیا رہا زندگی حیران گاں عمر بھر ہوں نوحہ خواہ ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تائبانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں ہائے وہ نازک گلا 3 دن سے خشک تھا ہائے وہ نازک گلا 3 دن سے خشک تھا بھر کے موجے تیر نے وہ کس قدر زخمی کیا تر ہوئی خون سے زباں لے سکے نہ ہچکیاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تھا یہ بانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں خالی جھولا دیکھ کر اے میرے نور نظر خالی جھولا دیکھ کر اے میرے نور نظر آنکھ بھر آتی ہے میری اور روتا ہے جگر سو گئے ہو تم کہاں چین پائے کیسے ماں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں تھا یہ بانوں کا بیان کس کو دوں اب لوریاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر کہاں میں مسافر شام کی ختم حد آرام کی میں مسافر شام کی ختم حد آرام کی قید ہو کر جا رہی ہوں گرد ہے عالم کی بند چکی ہے ریس ماں ہم کہاں اور تم کہاں ڈھونڈتی پھرتی ہے مادر ہے میرا اصغر
کہاں یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین اب تک ہے زبانوں پہ علمدار علمدار عباس علمدار سب مل کے جواب دیں علمدار اب تک ہے زبانوں پہ علمدار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار کس شان سے بابا کا علم تو نے اٹھایا عباس علمدار عباس علمدار کس شان سے بابا کا علم تو نے اٹھایا عباس علمدار عباس علمدار مشکیزہ چھدا لوٹ کے تو گھر نہیں آیا عباس علمدار عباس علمدار مشکیزہ چھدا لوٹ کے تو گھر نہیں آیا عباس علمدار عباس علمدار اے شیر جواں اے پسر حیدر کرار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار اے شیر جواں اے پسر حیدر کرار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار اب تک ہے زبانوں پہ علمدار علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار مشکیزہ چھدا لوٹ کے تو گھر نہیں آیا عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار عباس علمدار یا حسین 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 اللہم صلی علی
السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ السلام علیکہ یا نبی اللہ السلام علیکہ یا امیر المؤمنین و سید الوسیین السلام علیکہ یا خدیجۃ الکبریٰ السلام علیکہ یا فاطمۃ زہرا سیدۃ النساء العالمین السلام علیکہ یا حسن مجتبیٰ، السلام علیکہ یا حسین شہید کربلا، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا غریب الغربا، السلام علیکہ یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکہ یا شمس الشموس انیس النفوس بعرض طوس، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا صاحب عصر والزمان، الامان 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 من فتنة الزمان، السلام علیکہ یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکہ یا امام انس والجان، اجر اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہر اللہ مخرجک وظہورک، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، اللہم کل ولیک الجد ابن الحسن عسکری صلواتک علیہ وعلی آبائہ فی ہذہ الساعة وفی کل ساعة ولیاً وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودلیلا وعینا حتی تسکنہ ارضک طوعا وتمتع فیہا طویلا برحمتک یا ارحم الراحمین، اللہم صلی علی محمد وعلی محمد۔
مومنین یہ اعلان سماعت فرما لیجیے، کمنگ سنڈے کو جو ہے وہ مرحوم عرفان زیدی صاحب کے گھر پر، فرحان زیدی کے گھر پر جو مجلس منعقد ہوگی، جو کہ قسمی میں ہوگی اور ظہر اثر کی نماز ہوگی، جو کہ مولانا رضوان رضوی صاحب کی امامت میں ادا کی جائے گی، اور فوراً نماز کے فوراً بعد جو مجلس شروع کر دی جائے گی۔ تو تمام مومنین سے شرکت کی درخواست ہے، اور جن صاحب کے پاس ایڈریس نہیں ہے وہ مجھ سے